One of the questions that I get the most from you, my viewers, do we accept changes within a sprint? During a sprint, you're already committed on a list of user stories to do, on a list of tasks to do, on a sprint goal. And then there's a change in the sprint. Do you accept this change? And if yes, how do you handle your commitment? Because you're already committed on a goal. You're already committed on a plan. And if you don't accept this change, is this really what Agile is about? First off, let's agree on the goal of this video. We're going to talk about changes in requirement of user stories or tasks in the middle of a sprint. We're not talking about additional features, additional user stories being included in the sprint. No, a simple user story changes requirements. How do you handle that? If you want more details on how to handle new features being brought in the sprint, watch this video right here. The way Scrum teams handle changes in requirements of user stories during the sprint usually falls between two extremes. Yeah. First, we should freeze the scope and treat all changes during the sprint as new user stories. And second, Agile is all about delivering valuable products to customers, delivering value, maximizing value. And if a change happens in requirements, even if it's during the sprint, and this change will maximize value for the customer, we should do it. That's what being Agile is all about. First, let's hear from the pro-change people. There's 4 main reasons why these people are pro-change. First, from the Agile Manifesto, responding to change over, following a plan. Still from the Agile Manifesto, Agile principle number 2, welcome changing requirements. Even late in development, Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. And the story needs to be invest, the invest acronym, where N means negotiable. Negotiable, yeah. And the 3 C's when writing a user story. C stands for conversation. Conversation between the team, the product owner, or the customer. But the conversation, documentation is not fixed. The user story is not fixed. It's a conversation between the team and their stakeholders. What do you think about these 4 concepts? I think that they are valid. I feel that they make sense. They are centered around providing more value, maximizing value. That's what Agile is all about. But what do people do? What happens in the real world? Are we applying these 4 concepts? Are we welcoming change? I don't see it. No, I don't see it. Welcoming change, Scrum teams welcoming change. You rarely see that, especially when it's all about maximizing value. No, you rarely see that. And there's a few reasons why. First, we are already late in the project. There's a deadline. Usually a deadline imposed on the team. And a fixed cost. We can't afford paying for this change. So we ignore the value. We ignore the maximizing value part. We prefer sticking to the timeline. Second, it can affect the velocity of a team. In the sprint planning, prior to starting the sprint, we committed on a sprint goal and a list of things to do, user stories, tasks, amount of work to do, estimated first. And then we committed on this amount of work based on our projected velocity, how much we think we will be able to accomplish in the next sprint. Now, if you're adding new requirements, changing requirements in the sprint of user stories, this might mean more work. How do you handle this more work part? You already estimated and committed on a goal, on a list of things to do. How do you handle this additional work in the middle of a sprint? And a change in requirements in the middle of a sprint, that's not something easy to handle, easy to manage. You are in the middle of a sprint. There's work to do. Everyone has work to do, and you're changing requirements. This will disrupt the sprint, disrupt the team, especially if you're creating dependencies, internal dependencies, or worse, external dependencies you need because of this change in requirements. In order to complete this user story now, you need another team to do something. It starts to get messy. And this shouldn't become a habit. You've accepted once a change in requirement of a user story in the sprint. Now stakeholders think that it's okay to send changes in the sprint. No need to commit on user story requirements prior to the start of the sprint. No need to do backlog refinement. Why are we even doing backlog refinement? We can just start the sprint and there will be change in the sprint and the team will accept that. That doesn't look good for the team. It's not an effective process. It's not an efficient process. And what about the product owner in all that? Do you feel that's a good product owner? Can't commit on a requirement prior to the start of a sprint. We're talking about 1 week or maybe 2 week sprint here. You can't commit on something for 2 weeks. How can the team trust you? How can we feel that you're doing your best if you can't commit on a requirement prior to the start of a sprint? You're always changing the requirements. How can the team plan or be predictable when they work like that? You can't. Changes in requirements should be exceptional. So what do we do? What do you think? Accept the change? Don't accept the change? I feel that there should be a balance between responding to change, being agile, and also following a plan. Following a plan is important. Having a constant pace in the sprint, important. Disruptions in the sprint because of changes in requirements. This will affect productivity, efficiency, effectiveness of a team. It should be minimized. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't accept changes. It just needs to be minimum, not a habit. A sprint doesn't mean that the work is fixed. No, we can accept changes in the sprint as long as it doesn't affect the sprint goal. Not the work. No one cares about the work in the sprint. Some people feel that we have committed on the work and we need to achieve all these user stories that we committed. No. The only goal of a sprint is to produce, to build and increment a potentially releasable increment of a product and also achieve our sprint goal. Yeah, that's it. The sprint goal can be a simple thing that you need to achieve to consider the sprint a success. As long as we can do these two things, the changing requirements of a user story doesn't take a lot of time and it's gonna maximize value. That's really the important part here. Why not accept the change? To make things simpler for you, I have 4 questions that you need to answer as a team in order to know if you should accept the change in requirements of a user story during the sprint or not. Should you accept it or not? First question, does it serve the sprint goal? Remember, the most important thing in the sprint, completing the sprint goal. Will this change in requirement help you complete the sprint goal? If it's a yes, do it. Do it. If it's a no, think about the sprint goal. Will it prevent you from completing the sprint goal? If it's the case, you shouldn't be doing that because completing the sprint goal is the most important thing in the sprint. What about value? Will the customers use this new feature after the change in requirements? Will this change in requirements bring more profits or more customers to your company? In terms of priority, does this change in requirements, because it's going to take additional work to do this change. In terms of priority, is there nothing more priority? User stories, tasks, any piece of work more priority that means changing requirements? Should we do it in the sprint? Can't we wait until the next sprint to not disrupt the team? After answering all these questions, honestly, if a team feels that it makes sense to cater for this change in requirements in the sprint, the first thing you need to do is refinement. Refine it like any user stories, really understand the change, and then ensure that the developers also understand what needs to be done. Then you estimate the work like any user story. If it's easy to do, you just update the user story. Update the user story, add a comment. If you're using Jira or any other tracking tool, add a comment. We need to know for transparency and for tracking purposes. We need to know that there was a change in requirement, especially if it's changing the estimation of a user story. Add a comment mentioning that this requirement change in the middle of a sprint. Now, if the work is complex, if it's hard to do, I would create a separate user story. A separate user story. Refine it, estimate it, and then see with the team if they can consume this additional work, if they have capacity to do it. If they don't have capacity to do it in the sprint, what can we remove from the sprint? Lower priority user stories or tasks that we can remove from the sprint to cater for this additional effort, additional work. We can't just put things in the sprint, additional work. No, remember, we had a commitment. A list of user stories, what we said we would do based on our velocity, and we need to complete the sprint goal. We can't just add things to the sprint. We need to remove other things also. So check with the team. Which brings me to my next point. If you want more tips, insights on Agile, Scrum, personal growth, click on the video that stands out the most on the screen right now. And I'll see you in a few seconds.